The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as thousands of tourists shuffled through the historic grounds. Among them walked Marcus Thompson, a 23-year-old college student from Ohio who had saved every penny from his part-time job at a pizza place to afford this once-in-a-lifetime trip to England. His backpack bulged with souvenirs he couldn't really afford, and his phone battery was nearly dead from taking countless selfies. Marcus had always been the class clown back home. His friends knew him as the guy who would do anything for a laugh, sometimes without thinking about the consequences. Social media had only made this trait worse. He lived for the likes, comments, and shares that came with his increasingly outrageous stunts. His TikTok account had gained a modest following thanks to his willingness to embarrass himself in public places. The day had started perfectly. Marcus had toured the state apartments, marveled at the Queen's Gallery, and even caught a glimpse of the famous Long Walk. But as the afternoon wore on, the crowds grew thicker and the heat more oppressive. His feet ached in his cheap sneakers, and sweat had soaked through his I Love London t-shirt that he'd bought from a street vendor. It was then that he spotted the ice cream cart near the entrance to the lower ward. The vendor, a cheerful, elderly man with a thick Cockney accent, was doing a steady business selling overpriced frozen treats to overheated tourists. Marcus dug into his pocket and pulled out his remaining pound coins, counting them twice to make sure he had enough for a vanilla soft-serve cone. As he waited in line, Marcus noticed something that made his pulse quicken with mischievous excitement. Just 30 feet away stood one of Windsor Castle's famous royal guards in his pristine red tunic and towering black bearskin hat. The guard stood perfectly still at his post, rifle at his side, eyes fixed straight ahead with the discipline that had made the Queen's Guard legendary worldwide. Marcus had heard all the stories about how these guards never moved, never reacted, no matter what tourists did to try to get their attention. He'd seen YouTube videos of people dancing in front of them, making faces, even shouting, all while the guards remained as motionless as statues. The idea that began forming in his mind was terrible, but the more he thought about it, the more his social media-obsessed brain convinced him it would be hilarious. He paid for his ice cream and walked casually toward the guard, his phone already recording in his other hand. The vanilla soft serve was melting quickly in the heat, small drops beginning to fall onto the ancient stones. Other tourists were taking respectful photos from a distance, but Marcus had something much more dramatic in mind. His heart hammered as he approached the guard, whose name tag read, Guardsman Davies. The young soldier couldn't have been much older than Marcus himself, with a clean-shaven face set in stern concentration. He had probably dreamed of this prestigious posting, trained for months to earn the right to guard one of the Queen's residences. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that as he raised his melting ice cream cone. The tourists around him began to notice what was happening. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something unprecedented was about to occur. A few called out warnings, but Marcus was too caught up in his moment of viral fame to listen. He stepped closer to the motionless guard, the ice cream now dripping steadily. With a grin that he thought would look great in his TikTok video, Marcus deliberately smeared the vanilla ice cream across the front of the guard's immaculate red tunic. The cold, sticky mess spread across the wool fabric, leaving a white streak that stood out like a beacon against the ceremonial uniform. The crowd gasped. Some tourists started laughing nervously, while others looked horrified at the disrespect. For a moment, time seemed frozen. The guard remained perfectly still, but Marcus could see something change in his eyes. There was a flicker of surprise, then something much more serious. Marcus stepped back, still recording, expecting to capture the guard's continued stoic silence for his viral video. But Guardsman Davies did something that no one, least of all Marcus, expected. In one smooth, practiced motion, he turned his head to look directly at the American tourist. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and carried easily across the courtyard, trained by months of barking orders on parade grounds. "Sir, you are under arrest." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His phone slipped from his suddenly sweaty fingers, clattering onto the cobblestones with a crack that suggested his screen hadn't survived the fall. The laughter died in his throat as he stared into Guardsman Davies' steel-gray eyes. This wasn't going according to plan at all. "What?" Marcus stammered, his American accent sounding painfully out of place in the sudden silence that had fallen over the crowd. "You can't arrest me, you're just a guard. You stand there and look pretty for tourists." Davies stepped forward with military precision, his boots clicking sharply on the stone. Despite being roughly the same age as Marcus, he carried himself with an authority that made the college student instinctively step backward. "I am a serving soldier in Her Majesty's Armed Forces, and you have just committed assault on a member of the military while on duty at a royal residence." The crowd of tourists had grown larger, forming a rough circle around the unfolding drama. Marcus could hear the rapid clicking of phone cameras and knew that his moment of intended viral fame was turning into something very different. His mouth went dry as he realized that dozens, maybe hundreds of people were recording what was happening. "Assault?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "It was just ice cream, man. It was a joke. A prank. Everyone does stuff like this to you guys." Guardsman Davies remained unmoved, his training evident in every precise word he spoke. "Sir, you deliberately made physical contact with a serving member of the Royal Guard and damaged Crown property." He gestured to his stained tunic. "This uniform belongs to the Crown and you have willfully destroyed it." Marcus felt his legs go weak. Back home in Ohio, the worst trouble he'd ever been in was a few detentions for pulling pranks at school. The idea of being arrested in a foreign country, especially for something as stupid as smearing ice cream on a guard, made his stomach churn. "Crown property? It's just a shirt." "This uniform represents over 300 years of British military tradition," Davies replied, his voice growing colder. "It is worn by soldiers who have served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and conflicts around the world. It is not just a shirt." Two more guards appeared as if from nowhere, moving with the same practiced efficiency as Davies. Marcus realized dimly that there must be some kind of communication system he hadn't noticed, some way for guards to call for backup. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in, and panic started to claw at his chest. "Look, I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice rising slightly as genuine fear began to replace his earlier bravado. "I didn't know. I'm just a tourist. I'm American. I didn't mean any disrespect." One of the newly arrived guards spoke into a small radio attached to his collar, his words too quiet for Marcus to make out. The response crackled back almost immediately. Marcus caught the words, "Thames Valley Police," and felt his knees nearly give out entirely. "The police?" he whispered. "You're calling the actual police?" Davies nodded curtly. "Assault on a member of the armed forces is a serious criminal offense in the United Kingdom. The civilian authorities will handle your case from here." The crowd was getting larger by the minute. Marcus could see tour guides hurrying their groups away from the scene, but plenty of individual tourists remained, their phones capturing every moment of his humiliation. He thought about his parents back home, how they would react when they saw their son being arrested at Windsor Castle on the evening news. "Please," Marcus said, and he hated how desperate he sounded. "I made a mistake, a really stupid mistake. Isn't there something we can work out? I'll pay for the uniform. I'll do community service. I'll apologize publicly." For the first time, something that might have been sympathy flickered across Davies' face, but his voice remained professional. "That's not my decision to make, sir. You'll need to discuss that with the proper authorities." Marcus could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. The sound made everything feel surreal, like he was watching someone else's life fall apart. Just that morning, he had been a carefree college student on the adventure of a lifetime. Now he was about to be arrested in one of the most famous castles in the world. With hundreds of witnesses recording every humiliating second, the ice cream cone lay forgotten on the ground beside his cracked phone, melting into a sticky puddle that seemed to mock his earlier confidence. As the sirens grew closer, Marcus realized that his attempt at viral fame had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, just not in the way he had hoped. Two police officers arrived within minutes, their fluorescent yellow vests bright against the historic backdrop of the castle walls. Marcus watched them approach with growing dread, noting how seriously they took the guard's report. The lead officer, a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, listened intently as Guardsman Davies explained what had happened. "Right then," she said, turning to Marcus with professional authority. "I'm Constable Williams, Thames, Valley Police. You're under arrest on suspicion of assault and criminal damage. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." The formal caution continued, but Marcus barely heard the words over the rushing sound in his ears. This was really happening. He was being arrested in England at Windsor Castle. The tourist crowd had swelled to nearly 100 people now, all recording the spectacle with their phones. He could already imagine the headlines. "Stupid American tourist arrested at Royal Castle." "I need to call someone," Marcus said weakly, as Constable Williams approached with handcuffs. "The American embassy or something, don't I get a phone call?" "You'll have the opportunity to contact someone once we get to the station," Williams replied, her tone neither harsh nor sympathetic. "These are just a precaution," she added, indicating the handcuffs. "Standard procedure." The metal felt cold and surprisingly heavy around Marcus's wrists. He had never been handcuffed before, and the reality of his situation hit him like a physical weight. As the officers led him toward their patrol car, he caught sight of his reflection in one of the castle's windows. He looked exactly like what he was, a foolish young man who had made a catastrophically bad decision. The drive to the police station passed in a blur of English countryside and mounting panic. Marcus tried to process what was happening to him, but his mind kept circling back to the same terrible questions. How long would he be in jail? Would this go on his permanent record? Would he be banned from ever entering the UK again? What would his parents say? What would happen to his college career? At the station, the booking process was thoroughly professional but utterly humiliating. They took his fingerprints, his photograph, and inventoried his belongings. His passport was examined closely, and he heard an officer mention something about contacting immigration authorities. The word deportation was mentioned, sending fresh waves of panic through his system. The holding cell was small, clean, and depressingly real. Marcus sat on the narrow bench and stared at the institutional green walls, trying to figure out how his life had gone so wrong so quickly. The reality was setting in that this wasn't just a temporary inconvenience. This was serious. This could ruin everything. After what felt like hours but was probably only 90 minutes, Constable Williams returned with a clipboard and a stern expression. "Right, let's have a chat," she said, settling into the plastic chair across from the small table. "Tell me what happened at Windsor Castle." Marcus had had time to think about this moment, and he decided that complete honesty was his only hope. He told her everything, about his social media addiction, his desire for viral fame, his assumption that the guards never reacted to anything. He explained that he was just a college student trying to make people laugh, that he never intended to assault anyone or damage government property. Williams listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her clipboard. When Marcus finished his story, she looked up with an expression that was hard to read. "Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done?" "I'm starting to," Marcus admitted, his voice small. "I thought it would be funny. I thought everyone would laugh and the guard would just stand there like they always do. I didn't think about it being assault or damaging crown property or any of that." "The uniform you damaged costs over £2,000, Williams said. "It's handmade by traditional tailors and can take weeks to replace. That guardsman will now have to appear before his commanding officer to explain why his uniform was damaged, potentially affecting his military career." Marcus felt sick. £2,000 was more money than he had saved for his entire trip. The idea that his stupid prank might hurt Davies' career made everything infinitely worse. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Williams studied him for a long moment. "The thing is, Mr. Thompson, intent matters in cases like this. The Crown Prosecution Service will have to decide whether to pursue formal charges based on several factors, including your cooperation, your genuine remorse, and your lack of previous offenses." For the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus felt a tiny spark of hope. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Williams said, closing her clipboard, that while you're still in serious trouble, there might be alternatives to a criminal trial. But that decision isn't mine to make. You'll need to stay here overnight while we complete our investigation and contact the relevant authorities. The word overnight hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. He was going to spend the night in jail, in a foreign country, for something as stupid as ice cream and a desire for internet fame. Marcus's first night in a British police cell was the longest of his life. The thin mattress did nothing to ease the hard bench, and every sound in the corridor outside made him jump. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day, over and over, wondering if he could somehow go back and make different choices. Sleep came in brief, restless patches filled with anxiety dreams. The next morning brought a breakfast of lukewarm tea and dry toast, followed by a visit from someone Marcus hadn't expected, a representative from the American consulate. Sarah. Mitchell was a professional woman in her 40s who carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that Marcus desperately wished he possessed. "Mr. Thompson," she said, settling into the visitor's chair, "I'm here to make sure your rights are being respected and to help you understand your options. But I want to be clear from the start. The consulate cannot get you out of legal trouble. We can only ensure you're treated fairly under British law." Marcus nodded eagerly, grateful for any help he could get. "What's going to happen to me?" Mitchell consulted her notes. "The good news is that the Crown Prosecution Service is considering what they call a caution rather than formal charges. It's similar to what you might call a plea bargain in the United States, but it works differently here." "A caution?" Marcus asked hopefully. "That sounds better than charges." "It is, but it's not without consequences," Mitchell explained. "A police caution is an admission of guilt. It goes on your criminal record, though it's not as serious as a conviction. However, it could affect future visa applications, employment, background checks, and other situations where your criminal history is examined." The hope that had been building in Marcus's chest deflated somewhat. Even the good outcome would follow him for the rest of his life. "What would I have to do?" "Several things," Mitchell said, pulling out a document. "First, you'd have to formally acknowledge your guilt and express genuine remorse. Second, you'd need to make full restitution for the damaged uniform and any other costs incurred. Third, you'd likely be required to perform community service here in the UK before being allowed to leave the country." Marcus felt his head spinning. "Community service? How long would that take? I'm supposed to fly home in 4 days. My return ticket is already booked." Mitchell's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Mr. Thompson, those plans are going to have to change. If you accept the caution, you're looking at least 2 to 3 weeks of community service, probably longer. If you refuse and this goes to trial, you could be here for months." The reality of his situation was becoming clearer and more frightening by the minute. Marcus thought about his summer job back home, the classes he was supposed to register for. In the fall, his friends who were expecting him back with stories of his European adventure. What kind of community service? That would be determined by the court, but given the nature of your offense, it would likely involve work that gives you a better understanding of British history and the significance of the institutions you disrespected, possibly working with veterans organizations, helping at historical sites, or assisting with community programs that teach young people about respect and consequences. Despite his fear, Marcus had to admit there was a certain poetic justice to that. He had acted without thinking about what the Royal Guard represented, and now he would have to learn about it the hard way. "And if I do all that, this just goes away?" "Not exactly," Mitchell corrected. "The caution remains on your record, but you avoid a criminal conviction. More importantly, you avoid the possibility of jail time, which is very real if this goes to trial and you're convicted of assault on a military service member." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Jail time? How much jail time? Up to 6 months for the assault. Additional time for criminal damage to Crown property. Plus, a conviction would almost certainly result in your being banned from the UK for several years, possibly permanently. The choice, when laid out like that, wasn't really a choice at all. Marcus knew he had been guilty of exactly what they were accusing him of, even if he hadn't understood the seriousness at the time. The caution offered him a way to take responsibility for his actions without completely destroying his future. "There's one more thing," Mitchell added. "The guardsman you assaulted, Davies, has requested to speak with you before you make your decision. It's unusual, but the police have agreed to allow it if you're willing." Marcus was surprised. "He wants to talk to me? Why?" "I don't know," Mitchell admitted. "But I think you should consider it. Understanding the impact of your actions on the person you hurt might be valuable, whatever you decide to do." Marcus nodded slowly. He owed Davies at least that much. The guard had been doing his job, standing at his post with pride and dignity, when Marcus had turned him into a spectacle for social media entertainment. If Davies wanted to tell him exactly what he thought of him, Marcus figured he deserved to hear it. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll talk to him." Guardsman Davies arrived at the police station 2 hours later, dressed in civilian clothes that made him look younger and more approachable than he had in his ceremonial uniform. Marcus was brought to a small conference room where Davies sat, waiting, his posture still military straight despite wearing a simple sweater and jeans. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Davies said as Marcus took the seat across from him. His accent was clearly working class, probably Northern England, and his voice carried none of the harsh authority it had held during the arrest. "I wanted to talk to you before you made any decisions about how to handle this situation." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I expected you to be angry, to want to tell me what an idiot I am." Davies was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus with those same gray eyes that had seemed so intimidating at Windsor Castle. "I was angry," he admitted. "Very angry. But I've had time to think about it, and I realized that you genuinely didn't understand what you were doing." "I didn't," Marcus said quickly. "I mean, I knew it was disrespectful, but I thought that was just part of the job for you guys. I thought you were trained to ignore everything. I saw videos online of tourists doing crazy stuff and guards never reacting. We are trained to ignore distractions," Davies said. "But there's a difference between someone trying to get our attention and someone physically assaulting us. What you did crossed a line from harmless tourism into criminal behavior." Marcus nodded miserably. "I know that now. I'm so sorry. The consulate lady told me I might have hurt your career, is that true?" Davies considered the question carefully. "I had to file a report with my commanding officer explaining why my uniform was damaged. There will be questions about whether I handled the situation properly, whether I should have prevented it somehow. But honestly, the bigger issue is what this represents." "What do you mean?" "I've been a guardsman for 3 years, Davies explained. "I joined the army right out of school, did a tour in Afghanistan, and worked hard to earn this posting. Standing guard at Windsor Castle isn't just a job, it's an honor. We're not tourist attractions, Mr. Thompson. We're serving soldiers protecting one of the most important locations in Britain." The weight of what Davies was saying settled heavily on Marcus's shoulders. "I turned you into a joke. That's what I did, isn't it? I made you part of my stupid social media stunt." "That's exactly what you did," Davies agreed, but his tone wasn't accusatory. "And that hurt more than the ice cream itself. For a few minutes yesterday, I wasn't Guardsman Davies, a professional soldier doing his duty. I was just the guy who got pranked by an American tourist for internet likes." Marcus felt tears starting to build behind his eyes. The full impact of his actions was finally hitting him. "I destroyed something important for something completely meaningless. I'm so sorry." Davies leaned forward slightly. "The reason I wanted to talk to you is because I think you genuinely are sorry. And I think this experience might actually change how you see things. Most people who do what you did would just be angry about getting caught." "I am angry about getting caught," Marcus admitted. "But I'm more angry at myself for being so stupid, for not thinking about you as a real person with feelings and a career and pride in what you do." "Good," Davies said simply. "That's the beginning of wisdom." They sat in silence for a moment before Davies continued. "I spoke with my commanding officer about your case. I told him I thought you were genuinely remorseful and that I believed you learned from this experience. That carries some weight in decisions about how to proceed." Marcus looked up hopefully. "You spoke up for me? After what I did to you?" "I spoke the truth," Davies corrected. which is that while what you did was serious and unacceptable, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're a young man who made a terrible decision without thinking it through. There's a difference. The consulate representative said I could accept a caution and do community service instead of going to trial, Marcus said. She said it would probably involve working with veterans or at historical sites. Davies nodded. That sounds about right. And honestly, I think that would be good for you. You need to understand what institutions like the Royal Guard represent, what sacrifice and service mean. You need to see beyond the tourist attraction to the real people and real history. Marcus wiped at his eyes, surprised by how emotional this conversation was making him. I want to do that. I want to make this right somehow, even if I can't undo what I did. You can't undo it, Davies agreed. The videos are already all over the internet, but you can learn from it and grow from it. You can become someone who thinks before he acts, who considers the consequences of his choices. Will you ever forgive me? Marcus asked quietly. Davies was silent for a long moment. I already have, he said finally. But the more important question is whether you'll forgive yourself and whether you'll use this experience to become a better person. As Davies stood to leave, he paused at the door. Mr. Thompson, when you do your community service, when you work with veterans and learn about military history, remember this conversation. Remember that every uniform represents a person who chose to serve something bigger than themselves. Remember that dignity and respect aren't old-fashioned concepts. They're what hold civilization together. After he left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room for a long time, thinking about everything Davies had said. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something other than panic and self-pity. He felt the beginning of genuine understanding about what he had done and why it mattered. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the parking lot of the Royal British Legion headquarters in Windsor, wearing work clothes and carrying a thermos of tea that he'd learned to make properly during his extended stay in England. His community service had been more transformative than he could have imagined when he first agreed to the police caution. His days had been split between 3 different assignments. In the mornings, he worked at a care facility for elderly veterans, listening to their stories and helping with basic tasks. In the afternoons, he assisted at the Windsor Castle Education Center, helping school groups understand the history and significance of the site he had treated so carelessly. Evenings were spent at the local Royal British Legion Hall, helping organize events and learning about the experiences of British service members. The work had been humbling in ways Marcus hadn't expected. At the Veterans Care Facility, he met men and women who had served in conflicts from World War II to Afghanistan. They had stories of sacrifice, loss, and dedication that put his own problems into stark perspective. Many had physical and emotional scars from their service, yet they spoke with pride about their time in uniform. One veteran in particular had made a deep impression on him. Harold Winters was 94 years old and had served as a young soldier during the D-Day landings. Despite his advanced age, his mind was sharp and he had taken an interest in Marcus's story. "Young man," Harold had told him one afternoon, "the difference between a mistake and a tragedy is what you learn from it. You've been given a rare gift, the chance to understand the weight of your actions while you're still young enough to change course." At the education center, Marcus found himself explaining to school children why the Royal Guard's duties were important, why the traditions mattered, and what the uniforms represented. Teaching others had forced him to truly understand these concepts himself. He had studied military history, read about the regiments that made up the Guard, and learned about the battles and campaigns that had shaped British military tradition. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had become an educator about the very institution he had disrespected, but there was something fitting about it too. He was using his experience to prevent other young people from making the same mistake. His work at the Royal British Legion had been equally eye-opening. He had helped organize charity events for veterans' families, assisted with job placement programs for former service members, and learned about the ongoing challenges faced by those who had served their country. The Legion members had been initially skeptical of the young American who had assaulted one of their own, but Marcus's genuine commitment to the work had gradually won their acceptance. On his final day of community service, Marcus was surprised to see Guardsman Davies walk into the Legion Hall. The soldier was in civilian clothes again, and he approached Marcus with the same measured demeanor he had shown during their conversation at the police station. "I heard today was your last day," Davies said, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "I wanted to see how you were getting on." Marcus shook his hand gratefully. "I can't believe it's been 3 weeks already. This whole experience has been, I don't know how to describe it. Life-changing sounds too simple, but that's what it's been." Davies nodded approvingly. "I've heard good things about your work. Here. Harold Winters speaks very highly of you, which is quite something. He doesn't suffer fools gladly." "Harold's amazing," Marcus said. "All of them are. I had no idea what veterans go through, what they've sacrificed. I feel like such an idiot for what I did, but also grateful that it led me here." "That's exactly the right attitude," Davies said. "What are your plans now?" Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Davies a video he had recorded the day before. It was a simple, straightforward message to his social media followers, explaining what had happened, why it was wrong, and what he had learned from the experience. There were no jokes, no attempts to make light of the situation, just honest accountability and genuine remorse. "I posted this yesterday," Marcus said. "It's not going viral like my stupid videos used to, but the comments have been really positive. People are saying they respect me for taking responsibility and learning from my mistakes." Davies watched the entire video, nodding approvingly. This took courage. It would have been easier to just go home quietly and hope people forgot about. "Chelsea Harold convinced me to make it," Marcus admitted. "He said that if I had truly learned something, I had a responsibility to share that knowledge with others." "Wise man, Harold," Davies agreed. "So what happens when you get back to America?" Marcus had given this a lot of thought during his 3 weeks in England. "I'm changing my major from communications to history, with a focus on military history. I want to teach, maybe work with veterans organizations back home. I want to use what I've learned here to make a real difference." Davies smiled, the first completely genuine smile Marcus had ever seen from him. "That's excellent news. The world needs more people who understand what service and sacrifice mean." As Marcus prepared to leave England the following day, he made one final stop at Windsor Castle. He stood at the same spot where he had made his terrible mistake, watching a new guard maintain his stoic vigil. This time Marcus maintained a respectful distance, but he caught the guard's eye and gave a small respectful nod. The guard's response was almost imperceptible, just the slightest inclination of his head in acknowledgement. But for Marcus, it represented something profound. He was no longer the foolish tourist seeking attention. He was someone who understood the weight of tradition, the meaning of service, and the importance of respect. His flight home was delayed by several hours, giving Marcus time to reflect on how much his life had changed in just 3 weeks. He thought about the videos of his arrest that were still circulating online, but they no longer filled him with shame. Instead, they served as a reminder of where he had been and how far he had come. The young man who had smeared ice cream on a Royal Guards uniform for social media likes was gone. In his place was someone who understood that true respect was earned through service to others, that dignity came from considering the consequences of your actions, and that the greatest viral moments were often the ones that taught people to be better human beings.